is John. I am from Miami. I was born in Hialeah. My upbringing was, of course, my parents were Catholic. We always went to a Catholic church, and we were always spiritual. My starting point, I was always religious. I always believed in God. God has been so great in my life. But it was just a very superficial relationship, That's never felt like I was worthy of more. I was just thankful for what I had, but I just never felt like complete. My cousin Mark, he just kept inviting us to this new church that he was actually being part of. He's a pastor here, and we were like, hey, why not? Let's just show some support. Let's go see what's going on there. At first, it was just a little shocking how things were more relaxed, which actually I found very appealing. When I started coming to Miami Church, I met Rusty, of course. As a musician, I was just very inclined to, join and somehow play something, play bass, play percussion, do second vocals, whatever, because it's such good music. But then I started realizing that it was just not nice chords and nice progressions. The message and was just growing in me more and more, and making me actually listen to lyrics and not just sing something without meaning. It's interesting because when you go to church or when you want to build up a relationship with Jesus, you feel like you have to bring something to the table, like give or acquire more. Whereas for me, my big epiphany, my big moment it's actually what I have to let go of and just surrender myself to Him. And that's been a long process. That's where I'm at. Of course, it's not complete. It's a journey. It's just liberating because you feel peace. One of the other key factors for me to accepting Jesus was the fact that it's just not the end. It's actually the beginning. And it's been 2 years, over 2 years here in Miami Church, and I appreciate so much that feeling of friendship and community and family, and that's something that I was lacking in other churches. My name is John, and this is my starting point.
Well, good morning. I'm so glad you're here. If I don't know you, my name's Greg. I'm the pastor here at Miami Church, and it's great to see you. We're in this conversation about faith that we're calling Starting Point. And what we're really just trying to do is encourage all of us. We all have doubts. We all have questions. We are all somewhere on this journey of faith, like what's true and what's not true, what do we believe and what do we don't believe. And we're just encouraging all of us to look at it deeper, to actually dive into it with some intentionality. And really all of us, wherever you are on your faith journey, just to take the next step. And so that's where we're at today. Now, preparation for today, I was thinking back to 2017. I had surgery at Jackson. And they told me when I was preparing for the surgery, they said, hey, this is just a minor surgery. And I looked at it and I said, you know what minor surgery is? Something that happens to someone else. Right? If you're touching me, there's no such thing as minor surgery. Now, some of you have been there, right? Have you ever had this surgical experience? It's kind of like a surreal thing. It's almost like a movie, right? You're sitting in the pre-op, and you're really uncomfortable because you're anticipating what's going to happen. And in one way, it feels like forever. And then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the surgical team arrives, and it's this massive team, and they've got on these gowns and these masks, and they all come in, and it's like this sci-fi thing that's going on, and they just surround you, and you're like, ah, right? And then they take you from the bed, and they put you on this cold, sterile table, and they start rolling you toward the operating room, right? And you're just laying there, and you're looking up, and it's like the light panels are just kind of flashing in front of your eyes like this, and they roll you into the operating room, and it's cold, it's sterile, and you hear this beep, beep. Some of you been there? You hear this beep, beep? And there's these few minutes, maybe seconds, before you're out. And in those few minutes, there's a conversation that you have in your head, right? In my conversation, I don't know what yours is something like this. Okay, God, if we get through this, then I'm going to, God, if you just get me through this, God, if I get to the other end of this, God, then I'm going to. And the truth is, here's something that we all have in common. I mean, if you're new today, if this is your first time, if you've been here however many times we've had this, if you are new to your faith journey or you've been walking with God for years, we all have this in common. We all have this propensity to negotiate and bargain with God. We all bargain with God. You bargain with God? You ever say something like this? Hey, God, if you will, then I will. Or something like this. God, if you get me out of this one, if you get me through this one, then I'm going to attend church every Sunday. I'm going to give to charity. I'm going to volunteer. God, I'm going to quit spending money on myself and spend it on others. Or maybe something like this. God, if you will, I promise I'll always. Or God, if you will, I promise I'll never do this again. I'll stop. I'll be better. Like we've all done this. I've done it. You've done it. We have this propensity toward bargaining. In fact, in every religious system in the world, people negotiate with God. In fact, I find people who don't even believe in God negotiate with God. Like, okay, I need some help right now. To whom it may concern, I'm down here. You know, everyone at some point in life says something like this, right? God, if you will, then I will. And sometimes it can be serious, like when you're in the doctor's office and they look at you and they're like, hey, there's nothing we can do. And then it can be even less serious when you did this and I did this when I was a student. And you're sitting there and they're passing the test out. And right before you start taking the test, like, if you just help me pass this test, I'll study next time. Now, here's the thing. And I know this about you because I know this about me. Here's the deal. We don't keep up our end of the bargain, do we? I mean, if things go our way, if it turns out like we want it to, we don't keep our end of the bargain. Like, whew, my parents never found out. Whew. Like, oh, thank God the birth control kicked in. Like, oh, my boss was sick. I got an extra day on the deadline. I got lucky. Surgery went good. There weren't any complications. And you know what happens? Maybe it lasts for a week or two, whatever your deal was, but when it works out in your favor and in my favor, we don't even follow through. I mean, we're not better people. It was just some kind of desperate attempt. But here's the thing about bargaining with God. And again, regardless of your religious background, regardless of where you are on your faith journey, if you've ever bargained with God, if you've ever negotiated with God, you are making some really big assumptions. You're making some assumptions in the negotiation. The first assumption is this: God knows you exist. I mean, if you've ever bargained with God, you have way more faith than you know. I mean, you have faith to believe. In fact, I would say you have extraordinary faith. Because if you're bargaining with God, you're thinking, hey, God knows me. He knows my name. He knows I exist. He knows my circumstances, and He gives a rip. Right? If I'm laying on the operating table looking up at the big lights, and I'm like, God knows me. God knows that I'm getting ready to go under the knife here, and He actually cares. It takes some kind of think. If you think about it, if you bargain with God, you have extraordinary faith. Here's the second assumption you have if you negotiate with God. You believe you have something God wants. Right? It's kind of the idea of a negotiation. I was the king of this in middle school and high school. You ever do this at lunch? Right? You pull out your lunchbox and like, peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I don't want a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And you start looking around the table and you see what's around that. Ooh, look at that pizza. Hey, man, let's make a deal, right? You negotiate a deal because if you negotiate, what you're saying is, I know what I want from you. Let's see what I have that I can give you and what I can negotiate with you. And so it's like, okay, God, like, what do you want? What do you want? I mean, if you will, right, if you do your end, then I'm going to what, attend church every Sunday? God, if you will, I'm going to give, right? That's all they talk about at church anyway, is giving. So I'm going to give. Is that what you want? I just throw a few dollars into something that I think you care about? But here's the deal, and here's where I'm going today. This is the big idea that I want us to tackle for a few minutes. Here's the thing that separates true followership of Jesus or true Christianity from every other belief system. Like, here's the thing that separates every world religion from true Christianity. And this stands in stark contrast to what you may have been taught or what you may believe or what you may have heard about God. I mean, even if you grew up around church or around church, whether it's Christian or Catholic or whatever your background is, here is the big idea for today is God doesn't negotiate. God doesn't negotiate. And here's why God doesn't negotiate. God doesn't negotiate because He doesn't want something from you. He actually wants something for you. It's a big difference. There's a reason you can't negotiate. There's a reason that there's no point in bargaining with God is because you don't have anything God needs. You actually don't have anything He wants. If you study the life of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus, if you study the New Testament and the first church, it's really clear from the teachings that following Jesus is not about you getting something from God. He doesn't want something from you. God wants something for you. Now, there's a word in the English language that kind of encapsulates all this, that summarizes all of this. And here is the word. It's called grace. This word, this simple word grace, stands at the center, the epicenter of the teachings of Jesus. It's the core of the New Testament. In the early church, the first church, was the driver. This was the engine to every single thing that happened. Grace. Now, early in my journey toward Jesus, someone gave me a definition of this word, and it was simple enough that I could remember it, and it was understandable enough. And here was the word. They said, grace is simply this: unmerited favor. Now, that stuck with me because it's short and it's easy to remember. Unmerited, what's that word mean? Right? It means I did nothing to deserve it. It's not about me, right? Unmerited. It's unconditional. Right? It's all about the person who's dispensing the grace and not about the person who is receiving the grace. Right? Unmerited is I get something for nothing. I don't have to trade. I don't have to bargain. I don't have to negotiate. If there's any cost to be paid, right, in an unmerited favor, if there's any price or any cost, it's paid by the person who is dispensing the grace, not by the one who is receiving the grace. And this idea of grace, unmerited favor, is the central teaching, the core belief of following Jesus. And this is what sets aside true Christianity, true followership of Jesus from every other faith system. See, God is not looking for something from you. God is looking for something for you. Grace. Here's some more definition. Grace is getting exactly what you don't deserve on the positive side. Mercy is not getting what you deserve. See, grace isn't step up. It's an upscale for mercy to actually get what you don't deserve on the positive side. This is the center. This is the epicenter of what it means to follow Jesus. And I want to just look for just a couple of minutes at a letter that was written to the early church. It was written to followers of Jesus in a city called Ephesus. And this is what you need to know about this. There was a guy named Paul, and he was a historical figure. And when he comes up and he shows up in history, his name wasn't Paul. His name was Saul. And he was actually persecuting the church. He was actually trying to squash out this Jesus movement, which at the time was called the Way. And his goal was to arrest and imprison as many followers of Jesus as possible. And then one day he's on the road and he has this encounter with God. He has this transformation, and he goes from a guy who's trying to squash the church and squash the followers of the Way to actually one who becomes one of the most famous followers of Jesus in history. And he actually becomes the guy who helped start more churches than anybody else in ancient world. And so toward the end of his life, he's in prison in Rome, and he's writing a letter to the church at Ephesus. And this is about 65 AD when he's writing this letter. And it's still, so this is about 30 years after the whole crucifixion, resurrection of Jesus. There's still eyewitnesses to the whole Jesus thing walking around, and he's writing this letter. He's penning this letter to the followers of Jesus in this city in Ephesus. And so here he is, he's in prison, he's toward the end of his life, he's reflecting back on all of this that's happened over the last 30 years, and he's going to write this to the church. He's saying, hey, followers of Jesus, you got to get this. This is important. So this is in Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 1. This is how he starts it out. He says this. He says, church, listen. As for you, church, you were dead in your transgressions and sins. Like, thanks, Paul. It's super encouraging. But he's starting negative. But what he's really saying here is, hey, by the idea of dead, what he's saying there is, you were separated from God. You were separated from God. You were dead to God, and God was dead to you. And in fact, he unpacks in verse 2 and 3, he unpacks ways that they were far from God. He says, listen, you were far from God. And then in verse 4 of this, he's going to make a transition. Now, this is important to know. If you just casually read through this in your English Bible, what they've done is most translations have kind of tucked the core concept deep into it, and you just go right past it. But what you need to know, when Paul originally wrote this to the church, he wrote it in Greek. And in Greek, they didn't have highlighters, they didn't have iMacs, they didn't have MacBook Pros, they couldn't highlight things, they couldn't bold things. And so what they would do in the Greek language when whatever was the most important thing, they would put at the very beginning of the sentence. Because you got to get this. Now, some of the translations, in fact, there's an NIV on your chair. If you were to look at it in an NIV, this is tucked into it. You would almost miss it the way that it's translated. But here's what he says. He says, hey, as for you, church in Ephesus, as for you, you were dead. You were separated from God. You need to know that God was dead to you and you were dead to him, but God. But God. Paul is saying, he said, hey, you had a problem. You were dead. You were separated from God. God was separated from you, but God. And the reason this is so important is because the traditional way of approaching God, the normal way of praying, maybe the way you've approached God your entire life, maybe the way you were taught from a kid to approach God would be something like this. Hey, God, you see me here on this operating table? God, if you get me through this, I'm going to. Or God, I've done some bad things, but I'm going to do better. God, I know I haven't talked to you in a while, but I am going to start praying. God, things aren't going well in my life right now, but I am going to turn it around. I'm going to start doing better. What Paul is saying to the church in Ephesus and what he's saying to you and me this morning, he says, yeah, you had a problem. You have a problem. It's not but I, it's but God. And Paul says, hey, you got it wrong. You got it backwards. Your traditional way of approaching God, your approach is wrong. It's a new day. There's a better way. It's not but I, it's but God. And this is why Paul says, you don't have to negotiate with God. Bargaining with God doesn't work because God doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. Look how he continues. He says, but God is so rich in mercy. That's the way it can be translated is God has extra mercy. There's extra mercy for you. And you think about Paul, he's writing this. He's got to be thinking like, this is a joke, right? Like, I should have been killed. Like, really? Like, God should have looked down at me and said, hey, Paul, you're hurting people. You're destroying the church. You're attacking good people. You're putting them in prison. I should just squash you. And he could almost envision the conversation right in heaven. And they're like, hey, we should get rid of this Paul guy. Like, hey, I've got a better idea. Let's don't get rid of him. What if we actually helped transform his life and he went from destroying the church to actually building the church? And so here's Paul going, God, you have shown me so much mercy. And God, you said, hey, Paul, I'm going to choose you, the Jesus of the follower of Jesus killer, the Christian hunter, the church destroyer. I'm going to choose you to start more churches than anybody else. I'm going to choose you to further the message of Jesus. Paul is going like, man, God is just abundant, overflowing in mercy because I shouldn't be here writing this. But because God is so rich and mercy. And he continues, he says this, and he loved us so much. But God is so rich in mercy. And he loved us so much. Another way to translate that would be, because of his great love, which he has for you. Which he loved you. And the reason this is so important is that it answers the question, why? Like, why does God care about you? Why does God answer your prayers? Why does God give you a second chance? Why does God pay attention to you at all? What have you done to deserve his love? To which he says, nothing. It has nothing to do with you. The answer is because of my great love, because I loved you very much. And this is the essence, this is the core of the concept of grace. If you're here today and you're considering Jesus, if you're exploring what it means to be a follower of Jesus, if you're serious about the conversation about faith and really wrestling with it, this idea, this teaching, this concept is at the center, the epicenter of what it means to follow Jesus. And the reality is it doesn't work with the way that we view life. This idea doesn't work with maybe what you've heard or what you've been taught about God. He says, the reason why is because of his great love for you. This is why you don't negotiate with God. This is why you don't have to bargain with God, because he doesn't want something from you. He wants something for you. And then Paul, if you continue reading down his letter that he's penning to the followers of Jesus, he summarizes it all in kind of a little phrase. He says this, and there's our word, right? It is by grace, there's our word, that you have been saved. He's writing to these followers of Jesus. He said, hey, yeah, you were separated from God. You were dead. You were separated God. God was dead to you. You were dead to God. And it's not you. It's not but I. It's but God, who is rich in mercy. Because of his great love for you, it is by grace that you are saved. He's saying, hey, it's grace that breaks down the barriers. The separation is brought together through this idea of grace. Now, here's the problem with all this, right? It sounds good, great, way to go, bald guy, that's really cool. But here's the problem. This is why you struggle with this. This is why I struggle with it. This is why I had a group of people sitting in my living room this week talking about this idea. And to a person, some people who have been walking with Jesus for years and decades, that we all struggle with this concept. It's because everything around us says the opposite, right? Everything around us, right? You don't get something for nothing, right? If you want something, what do? You study, you work hard, you apply yourself, right? Like from a little kid to wherever you are now, everything around you said, work hard, apply yourself, be intentional, put on purpose, then you get something, right? I have a second grader. My oldest kid's a second grader, and they just had a test at school, and it was a math test. I think they did this system-wide all through Miami-Dade schools. And there were 42 math questions on this. And my little, what is he now, 8? My little 8-year-old comes home and he says, Dad, there's 42 questions on this. I got to get them all right. I got to get them perfect. I'm like, well, I never said that to you. Where are you? Right? He's picking that up, right? It's everything around us is saying, hey, you got to be perfect. You got to do it right. You got to apply yourself. You got to study. And you think about this drive toward success, right? And you take this hard work, this outcome-oriented culture, and you overlay that with your view of God, right? You overlay that with your view of God, and you combine that with the fact that most people in our city, right, Miami-Dade, the majority of people don't attend church. They're not in church this morning. But there is a knowledge, right? Even people who don't attend church, you see it in movies, you see it in TVs. There is a knowledge of the things of God and Jesus and the Bible, and it's actually dangerous. And you get this idea, like even if you don't go to church, like, well, I kind of have an idea of what God will accept and what God won't accept and what God may approve and what God won't approve. And you combine all of this, right? You combine this everything around you culture with this somewhat kind of knowledge of God in the Bible and maybe some stuff you were taught as a kid, and you put that all together and you put that, and that shapes and forms your view of God And whoa, you get why people negotiate with God, right? You get why every single person has negotiated with God. I mean, even churches pick up on this stuff, right? Some of you grew up in churches, right, where it was all about do, right? It was kind of like a scale. Maybe they didn't say it this clearly, but it was like, all right, here's a scale, and this is the good, and this is the bad, right? And at the end of the day, you hope the good outweighs the bad, and then you're probably okay. But if the bad outweighs the good, you're in trouble, right? And even churches. And so you combine all of that, and what happens to us is we have an inaccurate view of God. And what Paul is trying to say to the church at Ephesus, and what I believe he's saying to you and to me this morning is, hey. No, that's backwards. You got it all wrong. Your default, your approach. No, it's not you. It's not but I. It's not I'm going to work a little harder, I'm going to do a little better, I'm going to do more good. He's saying, no. Erase all of that. It's but God. But God. Period. It's just but God, nothing else. It's why Paul writes this. He says this in 2:8. It is for by grace, there's our word, you have been saved through faith. And this is not from yourself, not but I, not you. It's the gift of God. It's grace. Not by works. You can't work hard enough. You can't do good enough. You can't be better enough so that no one could boast. And if you don't hear anything else that I say this morning, I hope that you will get this. See, the typical way of approaching God, the faith system way of approaching God is this. Do. D-O. Right? It's all about do. Do enough good. Give. Serve. Do enough. But the Christian path, the true path to Jesus is done. D-O-N-E. See, our religion is what can I do? God, let's negotiate. What do you want? Like, what can I give you? How can I get your attention? What do you need? What do I have that you want? And Paul says to you and me, he says, no. No. All the do's, everything that we do, all the good, all the giving, all the serving, all of that, we don't do that to earn God's favor. We do that because of what God has already done. And so why do followers of Jesus forgive? Why do we forgive? Not to earn God's favor. We forgive because we've been forgiven. Right? Why do we give? We don't give out of guilt or shame because we're trying to earn God's love. We give because He gave to us. Why do we serve? We don't serve to try to earn God's love, to try to earn God's adoration. We serve because we were served. Do you know why we're kind to each other? Why we treat each other with honor and respect? Because God's done that for us. And so it's done. See, grace says done. D-O-N-E. And Paul's clear message to you and to me this morning is, hey, God, who's rich in mercy, because of His great love for you, it's by grace and nothing else that you can be in a relationship with Him. Will you pray with me this morning? God, this idea, this teaching, this concept of grace is really, really hard to get. And God, there's many of us in this room who have been working hard to try to earn your love, your attention. But I believe what Paul and what you're telling us today is, hey, it's not about you. There's no performance path. There's no do good path to God. It's not there. There's only one way. Grace, faith, belief. So my encouragement to all of us in the room right now is let go. Kind of what John said in that video. He said, I got to this point where I just had to let go and surrender and quit trying to earn or be or do something. And finally, I just had to let go. And some of you today in this room, you need to let go. You're tired anyway. You've been trying all this stuff, trying to work hard enough or do enough to get rid of guilt and shame or whatever you're carrying. And God's just saying, hey, no. It's about God, who's so rich in mercy toward you because of his great love for you. It's just grace. And so, God, would you rain down your grace on us today afresh? We just want to stop striving, God, and just be. So thank you, God, that every single man and woman and student in this place is just loved by you, period. And may that just wash over us afresh. We thank you for that. And that because of Jesus, we can be in this relationship with you. We pray in the name of Jesus, amen.